Most AE consulting firms today are going 150 miles an hour. Growth, growth, growth. And if you go that fast, eventually something might go wrong. Well, in this episode of the Civil Engineering CEO, I have with me Joe Hunt. Joe is the owner and founder of JHA Companies, and he's growing his company very rapidly, but he's actually going to do it in a little bit of a slower, a little bit of a smarter way, and he's going to talk about why that's a more sustainable approach. We're going to jump in with Joe, but before we do, a quick word from our sponsor. Before we go on here, I'd like to recognize our sponsor for this episode, Tensar International.
Check out Tensar Plus, the award-winning design software for construction professionals to design with geosynthetics and calculate their value on projects. Tensar Plus is simple to use with a powerful engineering system at its core. Whether you're designing a crane pad or need to build a temporary road over muck, the cost, time, and carbon savings can be calculated, making comparison with alternatives simple. Whatever you're working on, Tensar Plus is your toolbox for success.
All right, now I'm excited to welcome our guest on to the show today. Joe Hunt is the owner and founder of JHA Companies. He's a professional land surveyor, licensed professional engineer. Joe, welcome to the Civil Engineering CEO.
Hey, Anthony, thanks. Glad to be here with you today.
Yeah, Joe, I'm excited to have you. I've been lucky to get to know Joe a little bit. We've done some work with his firm, and he's a great leader. He's very energetic. He really inspires his people, and he's got a good vision. And so I'm thrilled that he's given us a few minutes here. So, Joe, just to start off, tell our audience a little bit about your company, where you're located, the type of services you offer, kind of the size of the firm right now.
Yeah, sure. So we're a multidisciplinary firm. We offer four areas of service: land surveying, civil engineering, environmental services, mostly of the ecological and water and wastewater type. We don't do cleanup work, and also building design. So we do vertical, and we have some up and coming building designers, soon to have some architects on staff as well.
Oh, awesome.
Yeah,
I know
yeah.
you guys are growing fast.
Yeah, yeah. So our locations we're scattered. We're in 9 different locations.
Wow.
And that does not count our remote workforce. If we were to add all them up, I really couldn't tell you how many locations we're in, but we work hard at identifying by one team in multiple locations and not dividing up by where we work. One team in many locations is our approach. An attempt to unify the team and not create silos spread around by offices.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
That's awesome.
Yeah.
I love that. So let's talk about your career journey. You are a professional land surveyor, a licensed engineer. Tell us a little about your experience with kind of both of those disciplines and kind of your journey, if you will.
Yeah, sure. Well, I think it's worth saying that, your formative years, your growing up years have big impact on, who you are how you start out. But I'm the son of a dairy farmer who at one point in the mid 80s bought a general store in a small town in Northeast Pennsylvania. And my dad and mom were a team. They were in business together. Continued to farm a little bit, but with that general store, they also had a school bus contracting business, which my brother and sister still do to this day. And my dad did some real estate, some rental property work, also some light construction. So really grew up in business and living around it growing up. Not knowing what I wanted to be when I grew up, my dad suggested becoming a state police officer or a land surveyor. My dad was a landowner and a farmer, so whenever he needed a surveyor, he had to wait a long time usually. So he's like, there's a need there, so a great opportunity. So that's how I started. I went to start an associate's degree in land surveying at Penn State in Wilkes-Barre. And after 2 years there, I found out I could transfer to another campus to pursue a degree in environmental engineering, knowing that with land surveying, there's an environmental component when you're subdividing lots to demonstrate that you can, provide sewage facilities for those lots. There's that environmental component. So the wastewater side really is what drew my interest into environmental engineering. In between there, I joined the United States Army, served 11 years with the National Guard, did one deployment after 9/11 to Germany, which was a great opportunity to serve. But then came back from that, and I was working for a firm right out of college doing some environmental work. Started out doing phase one site assessments, and then gradually moved into becoming a project engineer on wastewater projects. So I was able to work and be mentored by a senior engineer by the name of Doug McGill, who's passed on, but a guy that influenced me greatly and taught me a lot about the wastewater industry. I spent, I guess it was 6 or 7 years at that first firm in the Reading, Pennsylvania area, and then moved on to a firm down in Westchester called Yerkes Associates, third generation family business. They were into wastewater as well, and that's the type of work I was doing with them. But they also historically had been surveyors and civil engineers. And after my deployment and returning, they asked me to take over and to lead their land development group, which I did for about 5 years before starting the firm here.
Wow. A lot there. I mean, first of all, thank you for your service. I think that's great. My grandfathers both served, and I think we always need to appreciate that. And I do
Oh, thank
appreciate
you.
that. And I think what you said about, it's just a reminder of how much as parents, I mean, we're both parents, how much, influence you have over your kids when they're younger, because they really do kind of listen to what you're saying, and they really don't know a lot else a lot of the times outside of what we're teaching. So
Yeah.
that's definitely a reminder of that as well. But I will say that I think that it sounds like obviously some of the experiences that you had were great in terms of being hands-on, getting to lead that land development department, for example. And also, I think the whole idea of having, let's say, the surveying and the engineering sides, I would imagine just like in your career, Joe, just open up so many opportunities.
Yeah, absolutely. Um, even when I was doing wastewater work, I was reaching out to the surveyors in the organization to go out and collect data. So I was able to speak their language
Right.
and understood um, that surveying a property is much different than, or a boundary line is much different than going to a sewage treatment plant to survey it. And just the increased levels of communication there needed to deploy a survey crew to go out and get what you need at a treatment plant. But yeah, it was plenty of opportunity for sure. And I mean, there's an upside to that and a downside, because it's good to specialize and to focus in an area as well. So I have bounced around quite a bit, between wastewater and land development, a little bit environmental, but I would say collectively, it really helped to prepare me for overseeing a lot of things that I don't know a lot about, relying on other people to lead that and to get that work done.
That's great. Yeah, I had the chance to work for a multidisciplinary consulting firm for a long time with the surveying department, and I actually started in surveying myself. And what I liked about it, really, honestly, as a civil engineer, was that kind of got us in the door on projects first, right? Because they always
Mm-hmm.
call the surveyor first because they need a survey, they're checking out the property. And if you have the surveying, then and you're there already and you've done the mapping, then the next step is, oh, by the way, you can do the engineering too, you can do the site plan too. So I always saw that as a very distinct advantage when you're growing a firm, because you're
Mm-hmm.
getting in the door kind of type of thing. So
Yeah. Yeah. I worked one summer between my junior and senior year, and I worked on a survey crew. And the first day, I'll never forget it. I was introduced to the survey crew chief, and he's like, "Oh, great! I got the guy from, uh, you know, the guy fresh out of school coming here for an internship." And he had a lot of curb to stake out that day. And his first question was, "Can you swing a hammer?" Yeah, I mean, I've built fence growing up, so I could swing a hammer bigger than the one that he was swinging. So, you have that period where they look at you and they're like, "Can they do it?" And then you get to go out and work alongside of them and demonstrate, hey, I can do this. Of course, he was leading the way and guiding me. I really didn't know what I was doing.
mm,
But in that, you you get to earn respect over time and the credibility later that when you're speaking to another surveyor, you can relate at a much deeper level because you've swung the hammer and you've gotten bitten by a tick and you've gotten the sunburns and the
poison ivy, poison
poison
oak, poison
ivy,
sumac, and
exactly.
every other poison. That was my
Yeah.
favorite part about surveying. So yeah, no, I think it's very beneficial. I think the one thing I always talk about for civil engineers on this show and on our civil engineering podcast is you want to be well-rounded as a civil engineer, right?
Mm-hmm.
You want to be able to talk about surveying. You want to know the environmental side of things. You want to understand wetlands and all these other possible things. You're not going to be an expert in everything, but when you're talking to your client, you want to be able to have some intelligence around the entire process that you're working on, which I think is very valuable.
Absolutely.
And I think learning about surveying is a big piece of that.
For
So,
sure.
Joe, if I were to ask your staff what your management style is, how do you think they'd answer that question? How do you hope they'd answer that question?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah. I'm like, I don't even know what management styles there are out there. Like, are there these lists? So I did a little homework on this to figure it out. But, and when you mentioned management style, my mind goes to leadership style
Right.
in one sense. And I would say my management style, and I found this page on Indeed. It lists 8 different management styles. It's a consultative type management style, where seeking input, doors typically open, but typically at the end of the day, often making the final decision. There's another one, laissez-faire, where we're more mentors and leaders, and it's kind of a hands-off and letting people go. But I would say, in my own words, if I were to summarize it, I would say it's a trusting management style where, depending on others to perform. And in that, I'm reminded of what Ronald Reagan would say about trust. And when you assign responsibility, you have to trust but verify and follow up and check in. But I depend on others to do what we do, and certainly can't claim to do it alone. So in that, I think my management style has probably changed over the years as well, and has evolved into what that is. Managing is one thing. Leading, I would say there's really only one effective type of leadership, and that's a servant leadership style, where we're in a role to really carry the load of the organization, and we're here to serve and support what's happening, as opposed to leading from the top, commanding, directing more authoritatively. But leadership means you're willing to get down in the trenches with your team when you need to, work alongside with them. You're willing to do whatever tasks that you're assigning to people. Nothing's below you. And it's John Maxwell states there's 5 levels of leadership, and that's a journey for anyone, to go through 1 through 5 to reach pinnacle, and very few reach that. People like Winston Churchill reached pinnacle 5.
Right.
And but I would say in my role, I'm leading from a level 3. Some days I'm a 4, some days I'm a 2. Different people view me in different ways, but you really can't lead unless you're leading from a servant leadership perspective. And that's kind of and I observe that in the military. You see a lot of different leaders, and those that would that serve that way, you wanted to follow. You would follow them into battle. Those that led because of the position and the rank, it's totally different. You're doing it because you have to, not because you want to.
Right. No, that's a great way to frame it up. You'd follow them into battle. I think everybody would want that as a leader, right? They want their people to want to kind of follow them and come with them.
Mm-hmm.
And, I think the one thing that I'll say, I mean, Joe and I have worked together for a little while now. We're doing some work with JHA. And just what I can say about Joe, because sometimes it's not that easy to talk about yourself, is that Joe, you have a good mix between, I feel like sometimes you need to be hands-on as a leader, but sometimes you need to know when to back off, but you kind of have to have the ability to balance that effectively, right? Because there are just times where like people really need you to step in and give them guidance, but there are other times where that if you want to develop someone, you're going to need to let them do it and let them try something. And so I would say that that's probably one of the more challenging things as a leader. I mean, I think we're both, growing
Yeah.
our firms. And I think you have to go through different stages, and you recognize at one point in time that when the company's growing, that if you don't let people start doing these things, then you're just going to be in trouble. Right.
Hmm. Yeah.
So
Yeah.
you seem to kind of have a good feel for that, or at least it seems like you're trying to constantly, make that balance the right way.
Yeah. That's definitely a balancing act. And some days you get it right and some days you get it wrong. That's for sure.
um, So Joe, the other thing I want to ask you about, because you seem to be, relatively even keeled for the most part, and I think that that's something that a leader is something, you know, everyone's kind of has their eyes on you as the leader or one of the leaders in the
Mm,
firm, and if something happens, I think your reaction is what people are kind of, feeding off of, right? Like, how's Joe reacting to this? Is he really upset? Is he really happy? And so knowing that as a leader, like, is there anything that you have to do or just keep in mind or think about when you're trying to like give off the right energy or the right message to, your team?
yeah, that's a great question. Often when you walk into situations, you're presented with situations that take you off guard. The way you react to them, I think you find the answers by asking questions, and there's a tendency when you're leading to want to have the answers quickly. And I think what I've learned through the years is it really takes time to get to the answer, and the only way to get there is ask a lot of questions. So I would say I've grown to where I'm asking more questions, to drill down to get to the point where we can figure out, what's really going on, what really happened, what's the proper response to this. And I think that's healthy for an organization's culture as well, because what's not happening is the the finger pointing and the blame gaming is not there. Really, the objective is what's the issue, how do we get to the solution, and then after action, when we get to the point where we've figured out the solution, then we can go back and look at, okay, what went wrong, what would we do differently next time, um, and how do we move forward.
Yeah, that's great. And I think what's nice about the questioning approach too, going back to like people first and servant leadership, is you're really getting input from people and getting their buy-in and giving them the opportunity to, take ownership of a situation as opposed to dictating or telling someone what to do.
Yeah, and there's so much information that you're going to need to come to a conclusion, to reach a decision. So rushing to a decision isn't going to produce the best result, um, especially in some of the situations we can get involved in, in a complex construction project or a design where maybe things are going wrong. There's a little legitimate reason for why it's happening, but bottom line is the success of the project is what is the overriding goal, um, and that's our objective. So let's work together and figure it out.
That's great. No, and the
Yeah.
more I think about some of the things we're talking about here and some of the things you mentioned, Joe, like in the military, how you've seen different leaders and stuff, it takes me back. I do read a lot of military. I read a lot about leaders. General George C. Marshall. There's some really interesting stuff about him and how he kind of revamped the entire U.S. military in terms of our productivity and the way that it
Mm,
operated, which was pretty interesting. So there are a lot of good case studies there. But Joe, let's talk a little bit about JHA in terms of your growth. I mean, JHA is a growing firm. I know you have big plans to grow over the next few years. Talk a little bit about your growth strategy and how you want to grow in the right way.
yeah. Yeah, first, my philosophy on growth is that really any healthy organization, individual, it's the growth is the only option. Because if you're not growing, you're stagnant and you're declining. Much like fitness, if you're not working on it, it's you're going the wrong direction. So growth is the only option for us here at JHA. We're in a climate now where there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of work to be had. And I look at our business as really walking a tightrope with a balancing beam. And each side of that balancing beam, we've got these two buckets. We've got a bucket full of work, and we've got a bucket full of qualified staff to do the work that we do. And if any one of those gets out of balance, we're going to fall off the line. As the leader here at JHA, leading the organization, I walk that tightrope in different ways. Our project leaders that are leading their projects, they walk that tightrope in their, as they lead their business units, we call projects. And just balancing that is essential. In an environment where right now where there's a lot of opportunity and a lot of work, it's easy to say yes too much, get overextended, overcommitted, and really not take the time to develop the team, the staff, and to grow organically in a healthy way. We started out primarily in the energy industry, so we experienced rapid growth in our first 4 years from just a few of us to over 70 people. And then we saw that sector decline. And then, leading into that, we were working hard at diversifying. So, and as we've diversified, getting back to the things that we did before working in the natural gas play in the Marcellus region, we got back to doing things we did before and diversified and got back into water and wastewater. We in the past didn't do private land surveying work for property owners, and we do that now. We do it very effectively across multiple states. So we've had to diversify. So that's been one key strategy is diversification. Also developing and selecting our clients carefully, developing a go no-go process and how we choose and select our clients, just being selective there. But really, in the last 2 years, we've experienced over 20% year-over-year growth. So what we've looked at doing, especially this year, is just slowing that down and taking time to invest in our people and get consistent around how we execute projects so that we're all speaking the same language. And that way, when there's a need to move staff around to serve on different teams, it's not like going to work for another company. We're executing projects consistently in ways that are predictable when people on our team and most of our people are very capable of doing different things and shifting so they can work on a variety of projects. There's an upside to that and a downside as well. But if we're not executing projects consistently, that's going to be problematic. So for growth to be sustainable, we're slowing down a little bit and working on that right now.
Yeah, I think it's great. I mean, I had the opportunity to visit one of Joe's kind of in-person team events, and he talked a little bit about this, and I thought it was really like a breath of fresh air, because I think a lot of companies in the industry want to put the gas pedal down 150 miles an hour. And what happens is if you do that for a long period of time, your people get burnt out and the car starts to break, essentially, right?
Yeah.
And so Joe's approach, well, it isn't necessarily saying you're going to go slow. It's kind of saying you're going to go smart and measured and make the right moves and take the time to make sure that before you kick it up a notch, if you will, the car is intact and it has what it needs to go at a higher level or a higher speed, if you will. And so I think it's very important to, everyone says, hey, I want to grow the company to this amount or this revenue or this many people. But the question is when you're there, is everything still going to work the way it's working now? Right. It's like making that connect between the two.
Yeah. And we have been implementing the business process model of scaling up. And in that, they talk about business growth as a climb to Everest. And any effective climb to Everest, the climbers have to stop at base camps along the way, and it's essential to their success to do so. They have to acclimate to the altitude. They've got to prepare physically, mentally. They're changing Sherpa crews as well, those that are supporting them, taking them up the mountain. So that analogy in the Scaling Up book was sort of a wake-up call for me that in the climb goes up and down. You're climbing, but there are periods of going down as well. So just slowing things down, taking that time to prepare for more success.
Yeah, no, it's kind of like bracing yourself, preparing yourself, investing in all the right, investing in everyone, making sure that they're ready to take the next step, which I really like. And I think it is something that I think it's one of those things. We had another guest on the show a couple months back, Gil Hunch from MSA, and he said it well. He said, build the company with bricks, not with sticks.
Mm,
Right? You could slap it
yeah,
together real quickly and keep going and going, but eventually it's going to fall down unless you're taking the time to kind of build it the right way.
yeah, yeah. That's interesting that he used the building analogy. The building analogy that I've thought of is we've constructed a 4-story building on a 4-story foundation. Now we're ready to go to 8. So that's what we have to do. We've got to jack the building up and rebuild the foundation.
There you go. There you go.
Yeah.
So let's talk a little bit about culture.
Yeah.
Culture is very critical when you're growing a firm, as you know, especially when you're in this kind of growth mode. How do you focus on culture at JHA? Because I know it's important to you.
Yeah. Culture, everybody's got one. Um, you and it does, leadership influences it greatly. Uh, but so does the makeup of our team. So we're very slow in our hiring process in terms of who we hire. We vet on a culture fit before we even look at technical skills and abilities. Um,
Mm.
if we feel that someone's not a culture fit, they don't go to the next round in terms of interviews, regardless of how experienced and capable they are. It's really important to protect and defend the culture that you have. And I would say culture also it's pretty simple. People either feel safe and empowered in a work environment, or they feel threatened and fearful. And their abilities are not contributing to the overall purpose. They don't feel like they're contributing to the overall purpose of the company. So, it's either a safe place or it's not. And we make it a safe place. One, our purpose here at JHA, our mission is we exist to serve our clients and each other by pursuing excellence, leading others to success, and honoring God in all we do. My life journey has been one of faith in God, one that that's kind of the lens that I see the world through, a biblical worldview. So it's very important to me that we serve in a way that's honoring God, and not serving men to please them, but that's just who we are. And not everyone here believes what I believe, and that's okay. But it really starts there, and valuing people. People matter most is our first core value at JHA. Our second one is communication is key. Everything that we do revolves around our ability to communicate. And our third one is just being empowered with process, giving people the structure that they need, but yet empowering them to question, why are we doing it this way, and can we make it better? They're really the 3 pillars of our core values. Accountability is one that's kind of come into the forefront. And in order to hold people accountable, leadership has to be clear on expectations. And that's also something that we're working on here, is getting just clear around what we expect, writing job descriptions for people. Everyone here has a written job description. We call it a KRA, a key results area, so they know what winning looks like, whether or not they're succeeding. The other thing that we've done is we've gone to doing, instead of just annual reviews with people, going to biannual reviews. So we're checking in more frequently, and we're developing growth plans for people, so that they see a future here uh, with us, and can really map out a career and see how you can continue and advance when working here.
No, it's awesome. And I think culture is one of those things, obviously, that there's a lot that goes into it, as you've kind of gone through some of the components there.
Mm-hmm.
But what I think is important about it is that there's a big picture that everyone has. Like you mentioned, your 3 key components, which is great. So that's kind of at the
Mm-hmm.
top of everyone's mind. But then there's a lot of things that go into it. Like you said, the job descriptions, the KRAs, making sure that
Mm-hmm.
people have the structure that they need. And
Yeah.
so I think that's the important thing about culture, is that there has to be a high level where people really understand quickly what our culture is. And it's kind of like a
Mm-hmm.
language in what we do. But there's lots of small things that go into making sure that we uphold that
Yeah.
philosophy.
Yeah. I mean, culture, bottom line, when you look at core values, because your core values is what drive culture. It's really how we behave. It's how we treat one another. It's how we interact day to day. It's how we make decisions. around our core value of people matter most. Gossip is something we don't do here. We have an understanding that we talk to people before we talk about them. That's just our approach. It's professional. We are working hard at normalizing feedback. What we mean by that is you can give somebody critical feedback, and in a lot of places that's met with immediate defensiveness. But the way we approach it here is feedback is an investment in someone's future and career, and pointing out someone's blind spots, or making sure they understand that they're not performing up to the level they should be, and here's the mark. Being clear about that, so that they have really a goal, something to work towards.
That's awesome. I love that.
Yeah.
And I'm a big football fan. I'm a Giants fan, as you know, and I know a couple of years ago they had a new coach, a new general manager, and I know that when they came in, they wanted to set the culture, and they did have smart, tough, and dependable. And whenever you see them talking about it, they say, we're looking for players that are smart, tough, and dependable, meaning that's what we do here. When we draft a player, we're looking for those characteristics, kind of like back to what you said, is like, you're hiring for culture, and that's the number one thing. And if you have something that's very clear to your team or your employees, and they understand what our key characteristics, what our key goals are here, it kind of gets people on the same page, like right away.
Yeah, absolutely. And a culture, and like your body has an immune system, your immune system rejects things that shouldn't be there, whether it be a virus or some sort of an infection. And a good culture is a great immune system. It either, well, it'll spit it out and get rid of it, or it will adapt and learn to live in that environment, and become one of us, and become one of the team.
That's awesome. That's a good way to look at it. Yeah. All right, Joe, I got one last question for you. Based on, the climate we're in today,
Yeah.
what do you feel is kind of the number one trait or super important skill set that you feel is really important for engineering or consulting professionals to have today?
Yeah. And depending on where someone is in their career journey, I think it looks a little different. But communication skills, people skills are absolutely essential. Coming out of school, it was, hey, these are the things I learned how to do technically. But as time went on, I quickly realized we're in a people business. So just those soft skills, being able to interact with teams and people and clients, they're absolutely essential to advance in a leadership role within an organization, for sure. There's a lot of technical roles where you can grow and become a mentor and train others on the team, for sure. But I would say soft skills, people skills are absolutely essential, and often overlooked.
Yeah, no doubt about that.
Mm-hmm.
Well, once again, we're talking with Joe Hunt. Joe's the owner and founder of JHA Companies. Joe, I want to thank you for taking some time out of your day to come on the show here and share, some of what you've learned over the years with our listeners. We really do appreciate your time, and I thank you for visiting with us today.
Absolutely. It's great to be with you, Anthony. I appreciate the opportunity.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Joe. He's a great guy. He's very much into leadership, very much into culture, as you can see from what he's doing. And I think that whole point about, taking your time, right? Going slower to build something that's stronger is something that can apply to a company, and it can also apply to an individual's career, right? Make sure you're getting your license and your credentials. Make sure you're building the right skills. That's the way to grow. I hope you enjoyed the episode. Please consider subscribing to our channel here. We'll put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.